Al McGee with YETicket.com. I'm here with director Rick Rowley, and he directed The Kingdom of Silence, which will be on Showtime October the 2nd. First of all, Rick, this is very scary for me because these are some issues that I've always had since 9/11. For example, you did talk about how there were 15 Saudi hijackers at 9/11, but the main theme of this is about Khashoggi, the journalist. So why did you decide to do this project about him and also to expose all this other information?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, there's really two things that drew me to the story. The first is, Jamal was one of our own. He was a journalist who was murdered by the regime that he was criticizing. And so, whenever a colleague is killed, I think it falls on all of us to try to rescue what we can of their story from, the forces that would silence them. The second thing is that I spent around 10 years as a war reporter covering, conflicts in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other, conflicts in the war on terror, Yemen, Somalia, elsewhere. And in every one of these conflicts, Saudi Arabia was an active participant. But, every combatant on the ground would tell you that. But back in the US, that kind of story was rarely told. The story of this toxic alliance between the US and Saudi Arabia that has gone on for decades and that is just sowing violence and chaos in the region. So, those two things were what drew me to the story. And, once we dug a little bit into Jamal's story, it was fascinating. I mean, his story carves an arc through all of these chaotic, seminal, violent moments that have structured our time, continue to define our time today.
Yeah, I was surprised that Jamal, he was friendly with the royal family there. Not only that, he also was friendly with many diplomats here in America, like Brennan, the guy, I think he was in the FBI and people like that, and they all knew him. And also Jamal, he got around in the world with his journalism, but not only that, representing his country.
Yeah, his story is really epic. Spans multiple continents and also kind of really tragic too. I mean, he was more than just a journalistic observer. He was an active participant in like all these moments, and he really lived his life at the center of this whirlwind. I mean, he was the journalist who took the first photo ever published of Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan when he was a young reporter there, and was close to bin Laden. Then, he worked with Saudi intelligence. He was the ultimate insider. So what happens to him over his career is that time and again he sees his heroes. I mean, heroes who he's helped created. He helped weave the myth of bin Laden that helped him rise. Right? He saw the heroes that he defended in print turn into villains before his eyes. And he witnessed these terrible crimes that he became implicated in, and to his great credit, he was wounded by those things that he saw, and he changed. His story is a story of sort of transformation and redemption. I mean, he goes from friend of bin Laden, confidant of intelligence operatives around the world, to spokesman for the royal family, for the kingdom after September 11th, and then after witnessing, the princes he'd served his whole life murder the democracy movements in the streets during the Arab Spring. I mean, It becomes too much. The contradictions are too much, and he turns and becomes their enemy, and he ends up being killed for it.
Yeah, his story to me also was the same story as Malcolm X too. He did the same thing first. He was with his leader at the time, but then he saw things differently, and then he got killed. I don't know who really killed him, but I know it was some Muslims who killed him. But also another thing I was very interested in is that I feel that many Americans really don't know this information that you have in this documentary, because I feel there's a lot of it's depressed and they don't really talk about that. Can you explain some of that?
Yeah, I mean, there's really a lot behind that. I mean, the first thing is that Saudi Arabia depends on the United States. I mean, we have been Saudi Arabia's security guarantor since the beginning of the kingdom, and we've rushed to defend them time and again against all sorts of different kinds of threats. And so they know that American public opinion is incredibly valuable and important to them, and they invest heavily in maintaining their image. I mean, they spend billions in Hollywood, right? They're linchpin investors in like social media companies. They own a huge stake in Twitter and other places. They American universities, elite American universities, they They bankroll chairs in their Middle Eastern studies departments. They fund almost all of the think tanks in Washington D.C. that study the Middle East. So if you turn on cable news and you see a Saudi Arabia expert speaking, the odds are that part of that person's salary comes from the kingdom itself. So they do a very good job at running a successful PR campaign that has hidden and spun the kind of these crimes that they've been involved with, and that we have been involved with them. That's a big piece of it there too. But another thing that it's important for us to recognize that the film tries to make very clear is that these problems are not foreign from, they're not divorced from us. I mean,
Right.
We have been linked to the kingdom since the very beginning. We were part of the operation that produced bin Laden. We are partners in the war that is now creating in Yemen, that's creating this massive humanitarian disaster and murdering tens of thousands of children.
Oh yeah.
I mean, we're part of this. Is the creation of our own foreign policy linked in this toxic alliance with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, because we, the United States, we're their main importers. In fact, the money that they have, they really got it from us, the United States, us Americans, by using their oils and other products that they have. Now, Khashoggi, though, when he started to learn the truth, well, he wanted to stay in the United States. He tried to stay in the United States, and then he went to another country. Then they kind of like, well, come on, we'll talk about this, but you're safe if you go to the place in Turkey where he got killed. So why did they wait until then to murder him there?
I mean, that whole calculation that the royal family made around murdering this journalist is one that remains kind of remarkable and sort of singular in with at least what I know about the diplomatic relationships between our two countries. I mean, Jamal is a U.S. resident, a columnist for the Washington Post, and they lure him into their consulate in our NATO ally, Turkey, and on consular soil, murder him and cut his body into pieces. I mean, this is a violation of so many laws. It's so morally insane and so far out of like the norm of what we expect in terms of international relations that it's really just staggering. And that was one of the, when we began this film, we began it thinking of it as sort of a murder mystery, right? We're going to figure out,
right,
prove who was responsible and figure out how the crime was committed. And so we began that way, right? We met with various multiple national intelligence agencies. We reviewed some classified intel. We tracked down some insiders who'd never spoken before, and we found out new details about his killing. But clearly, along the way, very early, it became clear that the far more important and interesting questions were why, and who was this man who was so important that the kingdom would risk so much to kill. That was what propelled us on the journey of like retracing his steps in Afghanistan all the way to Istanbul, where he ultimately was killed. And I think part of that answer is that he was dangerous to them because he was the ultimate insider who knew everything. I mean, he was right there at the center of the discussions between the CIA and Saudi intelligence and bin Laden and other jihadists. I mean, he helped facilitate meetings with them. Back in the day, he was so close to the center of power for so long that once he came out and started speaking, there was no telling what damage he might do to this relationship, which is absolutely essential to the survival of the kingdom.
Yeah, exactly. Now, talk about a little bit about you. This is your first film that you directed?
No, I've done a few. My last film was also for Showtime. It was called 16 Shots, about the murder of Laquan McDonald. Yeah, which is great. So I love Vinny at Showtime is amazing, and I love being a part of what they're doing there. But yeah, that was the last one we did. But I've done a series of other features. I spent 10 years as a war reporter, and at the end of that, I directed a film called Dirty Wars, about sort of global Covert War. Yeah, it's a few years ago. Yeah.
Oh, so you like telling the truth, like people, you enjoy films that really shows people this is real. This is no fantasy. This is what's going on in our lives as Americans.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like people don't get into documentary, or didn't when I started, get into documentary filmmaking to make money. I mean, people to spend the time to make these films and to like pour your life and take the risks involved in it. I mean, people make these films because they want to change the world. They want to and you know, a thing that I'm always kind of humbled by is, you know, I mean, we take some risks in our filmmaking, but nothing compared to the risks of all the people who we work with on the ground. Like
Right.
in this film, people in Saudi Arabia who work with us, who just spoke with us. We're running risks that are far greater than anything we take, you know, and they don't get to return to New York after the shoot wraps, and they're left there to face the consequences of all this. But the fact that people take these risks, you know, really because they believe in these stories deeply, and they believe that these stories have a power, that and they believe in the American people. They believe that if the American people just knew what was happening, just knew these stories, that somehow it would change something. And you know, it's easy to get cynical about where you are in the world, where we are in the world, about what's happening. But the fact, their kind of hope and faith in us, you know, makes it impossible to stop doing this.
Well, you know, you said the American people, if they knew this, may they get a little cynical or things like that. The thing about it is I feel that they don't want to know. For example, the 15 Saudi hijackers for 9/11, we supported President Bush instead to go to Iraq, instead to attack that place. And for me, I knew that was wrong. I knew that was totally wrong. I was totally against it. But many Americans followed that and did not pay attention to that. And they didn't do anything about it. They didn't say anything.
Yeah, no, that's one of the key kind of turning points in the film is this. I mean, after the September 11th attacks, there are hearings in Congress. There's a public outcry. It is a moment where the entire U.S.-Saudi relationship is threatened, because Al-Qaeda, you know, it wasn't just that 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudi. It was that the funding and support and the logistics that this group that built this group all came from Saudi Arabia, right? Like that is the source of the leadership and the funding and of everything. But you know, the administration at the time, the Bush administration, on the one hand, had a really long relationship with the royal family in Saudi Arabia that went back, you know, decades, and involved oil and other things. On the one hand, but then on the other hand, the Bush administration's top priority was invading Iraq more than Afghanistan. They wanted to go into Iraq first, and in order to invade Iraq, they needed Saudi Arabia's help. You know, during the Gulf War, the coalition of the willing, or whatever, included the entire almost the entire Arab League. Like, you had the entire, much of the Arab world supported, was part of the military invasion against Saddam during the first Gulf War. When Bush II invades Iraq, France wasn't even part of it. There were no, like, the Arab world was not a part of this at all, and he absolutely depended on Saudi Arabia to make this invasion possible. It would have been impossible without them. So a kind of a bargain was made, and so the September 11th was kind of spun, and the origins of these groups and their sources of funding of these groups was hidden or swept under the rug, so that they could be our allies in what was their real priority, which was the war in Iraq. But Bin Laden wasn't just created by Saudi Arabia, right? He was a product of the covert war that the CIA was fighting in Afghanistan. So
we supported him there in Afghanistan.
We did, absolutely. The CIA in Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, we were working together, standing up these groups to fight against the Soviets at the time. And we have former intelligence officials who say in the film, Richard Clark, who said maybe this helped bring about the collapse of the Soviet Union, maybe not, but the world would be a better place if we just stayed out of Afghanistan and hadn't gotten involved in funding that insurgency.
Yeah. Well, my one final question is this: when people see your documentary, how do you want them to feel? What do you want them to think after they see this documentary?
Well, I mean, there's two. The film operates on two levels, really. So the first level, the big picture, is I hope that Americans start to recognize the nature of this toxic alliance with Saudi Arabia and reassess it. I think the first most important thing for us to do as a country is to disentangle ourselves from this horrific war crime, which really is the invasion of Yemen. I mean, that's just the first part of this.
Horrible.
This whole relationship needs to be reassessed. The second thing is on a personal level, Jamal's story to me actually ends up being hopeful. I mean, it's a story of transformation and redemption. Here's a man who found himself at different parts of his life, on the wrong side of history. Like, he recognized that he had unwittingly or wittingly, I don't know, he had participated in a crime, and he changed, and he tried to make amends for it. And that is his ability to continue to change all the way through his life, his ability to find redemption in the end, really, I think is hopeful for all of us.
Yes. And like I said, it's very scary to me, but also very informative, and it's very entertaining too. Well, thank you, Rick. I really appreciate it that you took time with me out and get yeticket.com. And I will continue to follow your career. And are you doing anything for next, or you got anything planned?
I've got a couple things planned, but I can't talk about them yet.
Oh,
but I hope to be back with you when they're out.
Please let me know. I'll
Right.
I'll try to keep in touch through your publicist and things like that. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Al.
Have a good day.